Hello and welcome to FinTechTalk. I'm your host, Charles Alton-Jones. Today we're tackling the biggest problem in banking, how to create a blueprint to unlock your legacy systems. As we all know, many banks run on archaic systems. Some are marooned on cores that were designed in the pre-internet era. Now, banks are complicated organizations. Last time I checked, HSBC runs on more than 50 cores, 7,000 applications, and the idea of creating a single blueprint for modernization seems ambitious, maybe impossible. But is it? To find out, FinTechTalk has invited 3 global experts on digital transformation to discuss whether it really is possible to create a single blueprint to modernize legacy systems. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel, because we really do have 3 very special guests. So Hans, if you're there. Hans Teslar is the Executive Director of the Banking Industry Architecture Network. BIAN was founded in 2008 and is a coalition of banks, financial organizations, and academics who come together to work on standards and interoperability worldwide. So BIAN is one of the most significant organizations in banking and fintech. Hans, wonderful to have you here with us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Cool. And yeah, we also have Tom Byrne, who's head of product EMEA at nCino. Now, nCino is a provider of cloud-based banking products. It's a unified platform, nCino, and it covers everything from consumer banking and mortgages to compliance and onboarding. 40%, I believe, Tom, of commercial loans in the US are run on nCino. Is that about right?
Yep, that's correct. And around 1,800 institutions using the technology globally. So I'm really proud of the footprint we have.
Very significant. And I also see, rather flatteringly, American Banker named it the #1 place to work in financial technology. So ambitious place, but also a good place to work. And from the banking perspective, it's a pleasure to welcome Stephen Cochrane, who is Transformation Director at AIB. Now, headquartered in Dublin, AIB is one of Ireland's dominant banks, founded in 1966. It's recently gone through a really ambitious modernization program, including moving to a new core. So Stephen is just the guy to give us the perspective of how this works from a complicated banking perspective. Stephen, great to have you with us.
Yeah, hi, Charles. And great to be here. Yeah, thanks very much.
Cool. Well, Hans, if I could just kick off with a really punishing question. And I will say to our audience members, if you have a testing question for our panel, please stick it in the chat. We love throwing them the most difficult questions possible. So feel free to ask away. But Hans, let's just tee this up. I mean, is it plausible to create a blueprint for modernization? Because most banks don't do it. Most banks upgrade a component, upgrade something there, a little API service over here. The idea of creating a unified blueprint seems ambitious to the point of being bonkers. What do you make of it?
Well, I think you're correct. So, but even if you modify here and you modify there, you can also call it the blueprint. So, depends a little bit on how ambitious you are. But what we see is that a lot of, and let's say almost every financial institution around the globe is looking to modernize the core in any way or form. And it is, as you just mentioned, the HSBC example, not an easy task. But what we as BIAN, and BIAN stands for the Banking Industry Architectural Network, try to do as a standards body is to help organizations in a structured, standardized way to move from what you have today where you want to be tomorrow. And we do have some examples. We performed already 3 proof of concepts where we built the BIAN Bank in a way that could be an example for banks how to move it. So what we see is that you need to carve out the core as much as possible and then move into a sort of best in breed environment. So that could be on-prem, could be on the cloud, could be something you develop yourself or something that you purchase, could be a service. So there are many ways. And yeah, the sad news is there is no one blueprint, because each organization has its own history, its own IT landscape. So that makes it extremely complicated. So we can provide you with a step-by-step approach, but some of our users are starting with step 3, others with step 1, and others with step 8, because there are many ways that can lead to the same outcome.
Okay. Stephen, I can see you nodding there. How does it work at AIB? Do you have a component by component approach, or have you taken a more comprehensive approach to try and integrate everything the bank does?
I think we've probably seen both, Charles, and but I think you get to a point where bit by bit is only going to get you so far. So I think every organisation will reach a point at some point in the development where that's not really going to be fit for purpose for the future, depending on what you want to achieve. So we probably reached that point probably 3 or 4 years ago, which really led us to think, right, where do we start this? If we truly want to go end to end, that means, yes, the technology is absolutely central to that, and probably the kind of key solution driver. But it probably means tackling a lot of things around about that, like your processes, your policies, your operating model, and actually, quite frankly, the culture of the organization in terms of how much you want to modernize if you really do want to go end to end. So I think, look, there's probably a time and a place for both, but depending on your competitive position in your market, the state of your legacy technology, that probably will determine when the moment is right for you. And it was probably certainly the right time for us around about 2021 or so.
Gosh. And Tom, tell me about your philosophy, because some banks, as Stephen says, have just such complicated infrastructures. They think, well, okay, coming up with a single blueprint is going to be extremely complicated. What are the benefits of taking a more unified approach? Because nCino is a kind of markets itself as an integrated platform where things fit together, they dovetail together. A lot of banks really struggle to achieve anything like that. But is that what banks should have in mind, or is it okay to have a siloed approach?
Yeah, I think sort of the siloed approach is probably the key thing that I would want to hit on. I think sort of the explosion of fintechs that we've seen into the space since sort of, the turn of the 21st century has given banks a lot more choice than they've had in the past. And I think sort of a lot of the decision making from the past was, organizationally set up to deal with, my consumer bank, I'm going to make decisions here. My business bank, I'm going to make decisions here. My corporate bank, I'm going to make decisions here. And sort of when you take a step back from a lot of that, what we've seen, and typically some of the business case when we come into institutions, is very much focused on how do we start to unify some of those experiences? Because the end outcome of some of those decisions means that I have tons of automation in the consumer bank, but I have absolutely none within the corporate bank, and sort of vice versa, where I have, everything needs to be self-service in the consumer bank, but I can't have any sort of self-service in the corporate bank. And I think we know that depending on different customer segments, depending on different journeys, that you need to be able to have more of a hybrid approach, and your technology should really match what the business use case is, rather than trying to shoehorn everything there. So I think we sort of always encourage at the start of these transformations, the banks to really sit down and think about, take a more journey-centric approach, not sort of segmented by, exactly what it is in the business units. We know that there are operational models that you have to come up against, and then start to think about where are the best in breed softwares to fit these problems. How can I find a pricing system that does everything I need across the spectrum? How do I have a core banking system that does as much as I can across the spectrum? How can I have an origination and monitoring platform that does the same? And what you start to find is when you have these best in breeds, and a lot of these fintechs are coming together, and of course the banks themselves will have secret sauce that you add into this mix and lay out that blueprint. So you can start to understand, okay, this is what the North Star ecosystem looks like, but that doesn't mean you do it all at once. You then start to find the logical steps, as sort of Hans and Steve alluded to there, of, where do I have the biggest business need? Where's the biggest return on investment? And then start to build that over time. And we've found that sort of to be the tried and tested way to start to get to some of the business benefits that the guys were talking about there.
Terrific. That's a really manageable approach. I really love the practicality of it. Hans, you said something which absolutely caught my eye, because I love talking about core banking. It strikes me as logical that the first thing you'd want to address in a bank that's struggling with out technology is the foundation. And you talked about carving out the core. Now, most people are familiar with migrating to a new core, but people do talk about coreless banking. Just talk us what you meant by carving out the core. What does that mean?
Yeah. So let me first explain what coreless banking means. So we invented the terminology of coreless banking, and it was an extremely appealing phrase. So everybody was scared. So So how can we do banking without the core system? Well, I always say, the sad news is you can't. So you still need a sort of core, and we can call it a minimal ledger or whatever we would call it. But if you look at an existing core banking system, there are so many functionalities in the core that should not be in the core today. Maybe when you purchased the software 25, 30 years ago, but why do you need to have a customer profile in the core? Why do you need a sort of a collection and disbursement in the core? Why, and so on and so forth. We all know they are embedded in the core. So if you identify the functions that you think should not be in the core, so they should be outside, for the sake of argument, that minimal ledger, then you can start carving them out. And if you use a standardized method, like the buy method, we have all the standardized API/microservices. Then say, okay, first you need to wrap your core with an API layer, and then you need to connect all those different bits and pieces using those standardized APIs. So you can say, okay, I have now a collection and disbursements part that is outside my core. I have my pricing part outside my core. And so you start shrinking the core more or less, and then you end up with a core that you can control. So I don't think that everybody will get rid of his original core. There will always something left, and maybe in due time, and maybe 5-10 years, maybe you can migrate that last piece of the core to something new. But I don't think there is a need to put that the priority of the list. I think the priority is to shrink the core and make sure you get the best of breed of all the functionalities that you need in today's state-of-the-art technology.
Gosh, it's fascinating. Yeah, so again, you're trying to make things more manageable. So you have things in discrete packages, as we know with cloud-native software, breaking things into microservices so that each team can work on its own chunk, which all connect via APIs. It's just a much more manageable way to run software. And I really love that, Hans. Stephen, I see you nodding away. What's the philosophy at AIB? Because I know just secondhand information really that you guys moved to a new core, Temenos. That sounds like a very big deal, but I can see you nodding away with what Hans was saying, that maybe there are some things that shouldn't be in the core, that you should create a more agile, manageable system. What is the philosophy you've undertaken?
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't just happen in a puff of smoke. It would be great if it did, like you just wake up and everything was on a new platform. But Hans is absolutely spot on. You're on probably not even a 5-year journey, a 5 to 10-year journey. And yes, we're replacing our core at the same time as our origination platform, which is ambitious, but it probably slows us down as we go through it. But we're really confident we have got the right core infrastructure, and in particular the software and the flexibility that APIs will bring give us sufficient flexibility as we build out those propositions, that we can tailor them to the different market segments, different jurisdictions. But the really key thing is that we have what we call, in lending terms, a common credit spine, so that we are working off core platforms that give us both the consistency and the flexibility to tailor to different market segments and customer requirements as we go. And that also points us towards, yes, a slower journey, but one that you can adapt and build in a kind of enduring way.
That's great. And we've actually got, for Tom, we've got a great question from the audience, which is from Sarah Norwood. What are the most significant roadblocks lenders face when trying to transform their legacy systems? As Tom, you set out just a really appealing philosophy, as bit by bit, do what you can. But forewarned is forearmed. So what are the challenges going to be? What are the roadblocks? What are the potential disasters?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I suppose the thing that is probably most eye-opening as we go into these transformations is sort of the caricature that we understand at banks is a lot of the time they're almost scared to touch it. It's working, it's functional, they don't quite understand it. There might be 2 or 3 people that still understand the coding language at the organization. And if you think about some of the largest institutions, I mean, even a little bit of downtime in some of these systems or anything going wrong on them can have a huge impact on maybe it's not even too far to say the economy and sort of getting money out and flowing the money. So we're talking about really, really serious stuff. So I think it's having the bravery and sort of having the guardrails in place that allows you to start to poke under the covers and not just keep kicking it down the curb. Because I think you start to look at the way technology is coming online. You start to look at sort of the incumbents being challenged by sort of these new challenges. I think the cost of doing nothing is getting exponentially bigger if you keep trying to kick that down the road. So it's both undeniably one of the biggest challenges, but I think it's also one of the most pressing reasons why you need to be undertaking the change now. And I think the one thing, and it sort of links into the question that's above this, I think the one thing that sort of stands out to me a lot of the time is there are the significant roadblocks, but I think it's also, do you understand sort of what your North Star is and what those metrics are that you need to be able to improve, what your business case is built on? And I'm not just saying this because he's here, but Steve and sort of AIB, one of the things that was super interesting about their transformation is it was very clear what their North Star was, what metrics they were driving towards and how they were looking to get there, and then using the systems and challenging the systems and all the vendors in that ecosystem of how are you getting us to these time to cash, time to, all of the customer outcomes that we're trying to drive to, and sort of having that experience built into the platforms, into the ways of improving it and making sure that is just becoming part of the ways of working.
Yes, Steve, do you want to respond to that? I mean, Tom was saying it's kind of, metrics driven, that you know kind of what your goals are. Is it as precise as that?
Yeah, so I mean, like we did have a range of North Stars, but that time to cash and time to decision, those metrics were really the key drivers for everything, because we knew if we got time decision right, it would drive a faster time to cash. We'd get a faster time to cash. So that drives efficiency within the bank operationally, and it also drives really significantly customer satisfaction. So like we used to have a really significant pain point for SMEs that one of the challenges they had was they didn't know where their loan application was, right? So, am I approved? Where's my documentation? When will it be sent out? So we are now at a position where for loans up to €100,000, we are settling loans in 17 minutes at best, right? So that is from application through to cash in bank. Now that takes out that pain point that I was referring to completely, because people don't need to ask where the cash is because it's been paid out, approved or declined, really quickly. So that is a key driver, but it affects so many other more metrics that we're trying to meet. And going back to that question about the blockers, that was really key as well, because every part of the organization has their own priority. So it might be efficiency and reducing cost. It might be reducing operational risk. It might be maintaining credit standards. It might be customer NPS. If you get the right North Stars, you can address those with the right focus on the right key areas of focus.
Okay, that's really clear. Thank you so much. Hans, I'd like to put that question to you about roadblocks, because you presented a maybe deceptively simple way of sorting this out, and sequentially moving things from the core, each moment of which sounds doable. But banks are very nervous for a reason, as Tom said. So, again, forewarned is forearmed. What are the big roadblocks in modernization?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important, I wouldn't call it a roadblock, I would call it maybe a hindrance, is that you need to make sure, let's say from the start, that everybody speaks the same language. Because if Tom comes in and he said, I have a loan solution, and Steven said, I need a loan solution, then 9 out of 10 times the offering is a little bit different than the ask. So you need to determine, okay, if I'm discussing loans or if I'm discussing payments, what are we discussing? So are we discussing the same functionality? Or we have an example of an American bank who wants to replace their payments engine. So when they started, they were on the impression that they needed 46 elemental business function in payments. Because over the years, they added, they did backfill for others who did that job, and so on and so forth. So that was their RFI, RFP. And when we looked in it together with them at the end, it turns out to be 7. And then all of a sudden you say, okay, these 7 elemental functions need to be performed in payments. So now we're going to go to the to the suppliers, to the vendors, say, can you provide me with this 7 instead of the 40 plus? So I think to get the boundaries right of every block that you want to carve out, and get an agreement up front with the preferred supplier on that part, saves you a lot of issues. Others you have to adjust it during the journey. So upfront, make the right carving out blocks, make sure everybody understands what should be in, and then move on.
Cool. Tom, I'd like to ask about the speed in which this should be occurring, because every cycle gets faster. It used to be the banks took 3-4 years to undertake a transformation, whereas these days we've got wonderful cloud-based systems where people can migrate rapid fire. So just tell us about the kind of time frame people should be thinking about, planning and execution. There's some cloud-based suppliers say, it's not months or weeks, it's days. But I mean, realistically, what are we talking for some of these transformation processes?
Yeah, I think, look, Steve outlined it there. If you're trying to take your sort of HSBC analogy and, rationalize that into their blueprint, that we're not talking seconds, days, or anything like that. I think we're talking more the sort of years and vision that sort of Steve was talking. I think the speed is obviously subjective to sort of the scope that you're doing. And I think what we always try and recommend and sort of make sure is embedded into the organization is, once you've got your blueprint, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? But then also, where can we have a quick win? Because I think momentum in this game is as important almost as some of the successes. And what I mean by that is, I think probably all of us on this call have been on projects in the past where you get fatigued, people get bogged down, the change management becomes exponentially more difficult. And it's quite often, if you speak to, there are humans in the loop, whether it's end customers or whether it's colleagues that still work in the bank, they are usually much more inclined to getting the small wins and iterating and seeing progress and visibly feeling you start to transform their institution than waiting for promises of more and more and the perfect thing, because the perfect thing doesn't exist. You're going to get there, release it, realize that something doesn't work. So we sort of always advise, try and get that quick win and look to do it in, months, certainly, if not sort of weeks, as you start to get more and more mature on sort of the first release, and then start to iterate from sort of that base that you've got, where you're actually dealing with real feedback from your colleagues or from your customers, instead of, hypotheticals that might exist in sort of project land that I think we've all probably been in before.
Cool. Yeah, I love that word iteration, and it really marks maybe the different way that cloud native systems work. That in the pre-cloud days, there would be big bang upgrade releases that were success or failures, and people lived or died by it. But is the idea that once you've successfully modernized and escaped your legacy systems, that I think it's maybe to Stephen, that there's much more process now of ongoing iteration. So once you have modernized, you then don't need a comprehensive blueprint, because you're able to make little micro adjustments, you're able to upgrade services. And as Hans said, once you've carved out that clunky core, you should have a system which is kind of modular, API driven, and then you can fluidly upgrade forevermore.
Yeah, totally. I think you probably still probably have to work to a blueprint, right? So you can allow yourself to adapt that blueprint, I think, a bit as you go along. But I think that kind of establishing what your end state goals are at the outset, and then setting your blueprint to that, and then having a roadmap that shows what you can do in the short term, the medium term, the long term. So, what's going to get you to that end state goal. As I say, it's okay to vary that route slightly, but if you've got the right platforms with the right core capabilities, you may find that, particularly given the fast-moving environment we're working in, like 2-3 years, the blueprint may need to be adapted, but you're probably keeping core to what your overall objectives are and how you deliver it. If you do it a slightly different way, that's probably okay.
I think one thing, Charles, if I could just jump in there, I think, we've almost made it 25 minutes without saying the words AI, so I'm going to say it as sort of better technology in the room. But I think there's a serious point here of, when we're talking to financial institutions now, I think people do realize the game's changed. And what I mean by that is, the most important thing for banks to be doing right now, if they haven't already done it, is getting their data in a place where it can be accessed by these types of tools, and tools that they control and stuff like that. Because really, we've seen it, sort of the trials and the products we're bringing out, some of the technology it's there and it's real. And sort of banks are, probably some of the biggest analytics companies that we have in the world when you think about the wealth of data and sort of the interesting data that they're sitting on. And if you can get that data out of spreadsheets, out of manual areas of the system, and you can get that accessible, I think the rapid pace of change that you're going to see in financial services and sort of the propositions that people can bring to market over the next few years is going to be like unlike anything that we've seen before. And you sort of said about days and weeks. I think when you start to introduce these types of technologies, you are talking in that type of scale. But the first step that you have to take is looking at my data strategy and how do I get that in a place where I can start to take advantage of all of the innovation that's going on in this space.
Fantastic. Hans, I'm just wondering, we talked about blueprints. Now, your organization, Bian, has produced all sorts of useful publications. I'm wondering, a lot of banks will be sitting there thinking, well, we're going to have to start from scratch, or maybe we'll hire someone who's been through this. What blueprints does your organization, Bian, have on its website or up its sleeve somewhere that people can turn to? Because you've referred to a few different interesting reports, such as the drive towards callers. Does Bian have a couple of roadmaps people can refer to?
Yes, we do. And then also the good news is that we are, I would not say often, but regularly quoted by the analysts, the Gartners and the Forresters of this world, to say, okay, there are many ways how you can modernize your core or how to digitize your bank. And in one of the papers, Gartner research paper that came out in March, they say if you use the buy-in landscape, the models, and you use the buy-in APIs, that gives you the opportunity to migrate in a fashion that they call undercover. That also gives you an additional functionality to tap into open banking. So it's not only because that's the challenge for the banks today. They not only need to modernize to serve their customer better, but also there are a lot of PSD2, PSD3. So there are a lot of those regulations that they also need to tap into, not to get left behind and still be up to the forefront. So just as an example, and tipping into Tom's example of AI, so we do create what we call proof of concept, where we build something to demonstrate how it can work. And the proof of concept, the number 4 one on callers banking that we are performing today, is that we try to use AI and machine learning to identify if a customer of the bank is trying to move his funds. And then we try to identify why is he trying to move his funds. And if we know if and why, maybe we can make him a better offer, or her, so that we retain the customer. So that's change. So then instead of waiting for the resignation letter from your customer, you proactively approach him, said, we have something that maybe is of interest of you, maybe you should look at this product. And then the underlying ideas using AI and machine learning is that they then probably for 99% stay a customer at your bank. So that is something you can almost do today. Again, as Tom said, if you have the data and so on and so forth. But AI and machine learning are extremely powerful. Give us the opportunity to explore options that we couldn't do maybe a year ago. Even a year ago, it was undoable. So I think bringing that into, and also you can use AI to do a sort of discovery phase. What should be my best migration path, and why, if you have the right parameters. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there that we have the same discussion, this discussion next year, it will be a completely different discussion.
That's it. And we have just 2 interesting questions, I think, that kind of overlap, actually. One for Stephen, maybe, which is from Shane Richards. How can lenders balance offering personalized services with the need to improve operational efficiency? Maybe implying there's a trade-off there. And we also have Colin Fraser asking about what strategies lenders can employ to ensure that the quality and accuracy of the data they collect and use. I think there's a bit of overlap there, maybe. So how does it work at AIB? I mean, is personalization something that you're really focused on? And
Yes,
does it detract from operational efficiency? I mean, when you got it right, maybe they work hand in hand.
So no, it doesn't need to. But I would say in the same spirit of being really proud of writing loans in 17 minutes now, we're a long way off in terms of personalization. So I think my answer to that would be, you can definitely use that to get better customer responses. We know that we will leverage open banking and certainly leverage AI. So I would say we're monitoring the latter really closely in terms of how that develops. We're reasonably well enabled on open banking, but I'd kind of go back to what Tom said about you have to get your data into the right space. And banks are in such a privileged position in terms of the data that we have from customers. And it's quite shameful the way that we are not harnessing that to use it for that level of personalization that customers expect across all other aspects of their lives, whether it's their Spotify playlist or their Uber habits or whatever. We're a long way off that. But the important thing for us is that we know in nCino that we've got a platform that will facilitate that. It is extremely beneficial for us to be getting our data into the right place that Tom describes, so that we know we will be able to leverage that in the near future. So that's definitely short to medium term rather than long term for us. But I mean, it definitely isn't counter to operational efficiency. It's probably a significant enabler of it, because we know that where we can automate decisions, we get really good underwriting, we get really good responses from customers, and generally it makes it's more efficient and more effective.
But Tom, I can see you nodding away there. I mean, personalization is notoriously difficult. How do you see it at nCino? Is it something that is realistic with the right platform?
Yeah, I think exactly to some of the stuff that Steve was saying. And, you did say it sounds like it's a bit of a trade-off, and I don't think we would see it as a trade-off. I think we've sort of got this mantra, especially sort of when we start to talk about commercial banks, of automation sort of where it makes sense and augmentation everywhere else. And what we mean by that is there's probably a number of tasks that we know about, a number of steps that can be automated today just by using technology. Stuff that doesn't add any value in the loop. There's no need to involve humans in the ability to change a request or whatever it might be, of sort of all of those menial tasks that you've got there. But there are, when you start to get into higher finance, there are very experienced people that are doing very clever things and sort of have personal relationships that are, of paramount importance to the bank strategy, to the way that the customer's supported. But it's also about how do we get the right insights into those people's hands so they can offer a personalized service. So the technology really needs to facilitate, the way that customers want to be interacted with, and not sort of dictate, this is the path that you go down. It needs to be able to be flexible, as I sort of said at the start there, to be able to offer that personalized service. And we increasingly see banks, using their data, whether it's in the way that they price loans, whether it's in the way that they reach out to customers, whether it's, Steve spoke about sort of the underwriting there, and that, how insightful is it for a small business owner to understand that their metrics and their financial metrics, how do they compare to other peers of other manufacturing companies that look and smell like them? Like that type of insights that we use on the credit side of the house, how do we start to unlock those insights and give them back to customers? There's all these little areas when you start to look at the value chain, but the first step is getting the data right. And the next step is how do we start to expose that in a way that is helpful and makes sense to these customers, to start to be, either trusted advisors when there's a human in the loop, or start to give them digital experiences that really resonate with them, alongside sort of the Spotifys and the Ubers of the world.
That's great. And I'd just like to conclude by just returning this idea of a blueprint, because I changed my mind during the course of this discussion. I assumed that people would need a sort of, a comprehensive vision. But seemingly, the panelists have all agreed that no, it's better to just look at as you quick wins, longer term things, and to stagger the program. But I wonder whether, in fact, to return to the idea of a blueprint, whether it's possible to have a philosophical vision for what a bank should be. I mean, Paul Taylor at Thought Machine talks about a fully automated bank, a bank with almost no employees other than a few software developers. That's his, ultimate vision 10, 20 years hence. And we could take inspiration from other companies. such as Apple, whose fundamental philosophy is around a sort of Zen vision of design. It is more than just any single product. Hans, do you have a vision, a blueprint of what banks should be about being? I don't know whether it's modular, whether it's about data flowing fluidly through them, or whether it's even a higher level philosophy. With a blueprint, what is the sort of top level vision of what a bank could be?
Yeah, well, first of all, a bank, and that is for every geography, should be customer focused, customer centric. So that full stop. So we did a research last year together with IBM Research, and then we asked the C levels of the bank, what do you think your customers want? And then we interviewed 12,000 customers. What do you expect from your bank? And you will probably understand complete mismatch. The only thing they agreed on was security. Everybody wants secure transactions. And then the banks thinks, as an example, we would like to provide buy now, pay later. Nobody's interested in buy now, pay later. None of the consumers said, I would like to have buy now, pay later. So getting to understand what your customer wants and then make sure that your organization is capable of providing those services that they want, not the one you think they want. So I think the dot on the horizon is that you have to think more outside in than inside out. So today it's more, we can offer you this instead of what do you want. So that paradigm shift, I think it's important. And then you will see that all the technology you need to fulfill the needs of the customer are already available. So it's just a question that you prioritize them in the right manner that aligns with the needs of your customer. And if it's a retail customer or a wholesale customer, or it's a corporate, those are the buckets you have to look into. Fabulous. So that's my suggestion.
Well, that's pretty high level. And Tom, you deal with a tremendous amount of companies who want to be, cutting edge financial organizations. What philosophies have you seen that you thought really worked, and what do you advise?
Yeah, I think just building on Hans's point as well there, I think that the main trend that we've seen certainly in the last few years and sort of, is meeting the customer where they are. I think the friction of having customers have to come, archaically into the branch and sort of those sort of areas, but even getting out of the experience that they're in to take out, log into your system, come into your channel, think about it, and then sort of rekey all of the data that they've already said in a comparison website or whatever it might be, is archaic, is going away and sort of rapidly going away. But I think the other big vision that we sort of have, and speaking some of the institutions that we work with, is how does the bank start to move not only from meeting you at that channel, but starting to work for the customer in the background, not relying on the consumer or the business or the corporate coming to you and saying, hey, I actually now need my working capital extended. I actually now want a mortgage. But how do you start to have the technology support a infrastructure where I have my money within Bank A and Bank A knows my risk profile, so it's automatically doing these types of transactions for me. And then, at certain points in time, asking me, am I okay with this? How am I doing? Have my circumstances changed? So being less of a passive, somebody who is fulfilling requests on behalf of me, but doing the smart, intelligent stuff and the thinking based off of my preferences and what they know about me. And I think the banks that crack that over the next 5, 10 years, whatever horizon you want to pick, are ultimately going to be the winners in the way that we start to think about it, and some of the institutions that we're seeing start on this journey.
So good, thank you. And Stephen, really just to wrap us up, you're in the thick of it, at the in the trenches, so to speak. What's the vision at AIB? Are you, like Hans, being very customer-centric and asking them what their vision of a bank should be? Or maybe to return to Steve Jobs and Apple, he had a vision for a company that never asked customers what they wanted. He says they don't know what they want. We're going to give them something they never realized. How does AIB really, at a high level, conceive its role?
Definitely a bit of both, because I think you've got to offer customers the best of what's available in the market. And I heard a great expression last week about you don't have to be best in class, but it's good to be in the class. And I think that's probably where our ambition would lie. And I think you have to listen to what customers say, because that's the thing that keeps you in business. But I think if you can excite them into coming along that journey with you and giving them more than they expect, I think that's when you really start to win. So hopefully we're on that path.
Wow, thank you so much. Guys, that's it. But I've learned a huge amount. I began by thinking, well, a blueprint sounds unmanageable. Tom spoke about how nervous some organizations are about thinking about modernization. But I think, as Hans and Stephen said, it's if taken in a modular fashion, if you carve out that core, if you create an organization that combines quick wins with long-term thinking, it really is possible to put together a comprehensive blueprint for the long term. Yep, to create an organization that is both customer-centric and visionary. So, yeah, Hans, Tom, Stephen, thank you so much for your expertise. And to all the FinTech Talk viewers, thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye.